black man in police custody 2 years ago. A lawyer for the family of Ronald Greene says they were initially told that he crashed his car while being pursued by Louisiana state troopers in 2019.
Now, body camera footage has emerged, and it shows Greene being tased, kicked, and dragged by the officers before his death. The case is now the subject of a federal civil rights investigation. CNN's Ryan Young joins us live now to explain exactly the timeline of what happened and what we were told about what happened, Ryan.
Yeah, John, let's also not forget that this video was leaked. It was not officially released, and so we've never seen the full tape so far. And if you think about this, the family has been in limbo for the last 2 years.
I'm your brother, I'm scared.
Terrifying pleas from Ronald Greene after a high-speed chase led to a deadly confrontation with Louisiana State Police just outside the city of Monroe in May of 2019.
Get up here.
In body cam video obtained by the Associated Press, troopers can be seen repeatedly punching Greene after dragging him out of his vehicle.
Taser, taser, taser.
Troopers tase Greene multiple times while he's face down on the ground as they attempt to handcuff him. Another trooper can be seen kicking Greene.
All right, all over. This guy ain't got AIDS.
The Associated Press released 3 segments of the original video, which it says is 46 minutes long. Only 2 of the video clips have audio. CNN has neither reviewed or obtained the original video, and it's unclear what occurred before or in between the video clips. The video is being seen by the public for the first time, but the incident took place 2 years ago. The body cam footage is shocking considering the way the encounter was described in Louisiana State Police initial report in 2019, which says troopers attempted to pull Greene over for an unspecified traffic violation that ended when Greene crashed his vehicle. The report also says, quote, Greene was taken into custody after resisting arrest and a struggle with troopers. Greene died on the way to the hospital, the report said. At no time on the video can troopers be seen trying to render any medical aid to Greene, who, according to the Associated Press, was face down and moaning for more than 9 minutes. CNN has reached out to the attorneys for the officers for comment. Lee Merritt is an attorney for the Greene family and spoke to CNN.
It's not only what you're seeing, but the sounds that go with it. You can hear him screaming and writhing in pain as he says, I'm your brother, please stop. I'm sorry, I was just scared.
The Department of Justice is investigating the incident, and in a statement to CNN, the Louisiana State Police says the premature public release of investigative files and video evidence in this case is not authorized and was not obtained through official sources. LSP is confident in the judicial system and fair review of this incident and continues to offer our full cooperation. Unauthorized release of evidence undermines the investigative process and compromises the fair and impartial outcome for the Greene family, LSMP employees, and the community. We are unable to provide any further information at this time. Greene's mother tells NBC she thinks the Louisiana State Police murdered her son.
They beat him with the purpose of letting him just die.
John, when you think about this, it's so very difficult watching this video over and over again. One of the things about it, though, is Greene was left pretty much face down, and we know from watching the George Floyd case that officers should flip people over so the person can obviously be able to breathe. That did not happen in this case. Lee Merritt's hoping that more of this video would come out. That way the public can see what actually happened.
Ryan Young, thank you very much for this. Joining us now is Detroit Interim Police Chief James Craig and former Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey, a CNN law enforcement analyst. Chief Craig, let me ask you this. I mean, there are 2 issues here. Number 1, the treatment that Ronald Greene experienced there. But number 2, what the police said about what happened. The fact that they said there was a struggle, but they certainly didn't say tase. They didn't say there was blood flying everywhere, so much so that they commented on it. And then they merely said he died on the way in the car afterwards, as if it just sort of miraculously happened in a vacuum. The omission here of the details seemed glaring, yes?
You know, absolutely, John. This is deeply troubling, and certainly my prayers go out to the Greene family. But you pointed out the 2 big issues. One, we know just looking at the video, this was an example of what defines excessive use of force. And then on top of that, the inaccurate report And on top of that, they indicate that the officer was at some point suspended. He's returned to work. So what's the status of the internal investigation? Let's face it, this is yet another big setback for our profession. We're in a crisis right now, and this does nothing. And then the fact that there's statements being made about premature release of this information, I guess these folks haven't been paying attention on what's going on around the country. This is about maintaining public trust. And you're not going to maintain public trust when you withhold significant information. So this is bad, and here we are, yet another incident.
It is hard, Commissioner Ramsey, to look at this Louisiana State Police statement where they're emphasizing that this is an unauthorized release, and in a way it's like, thank God that we can see something here, which is the contrast between the truth and what is represented by the police in the report in this case. We saw this in the case of George Floyd. That police report did not describe what happened to George Floyd at all.
Yeah, there's no question about it. First of all, apparently the officials down in Louisiana are completely out of touch. I couldn't agree more with Chief Craig on that issue, but there are a lot of troubling parts of this. The tasing of the individual for an extended period of time, the fact that he was laying in a prone position face down for such an extended period of time. And you can see from that, even though there was no extra body weight applied to him during the majority of that period of time, it's still very hard to breathe when you're laying on your chest with your arms behind your back. And you couple that with the fact that his heart rate was probably elevated and he was excited because of all the things going on. That clearly is something that should not have happened. He tried to roll over at one point, and one of the troopers actually prevented him from rolling over. And then the dragging, later in the tape, you can see one trooper actually dragging him by his ankles. This is without question excessive force. My understanding is the ruling of the medical examiner was accidental, but she was not told that there was that kind of physical contact with police. So this is a very troubling case on a lot of different levels, and that tape should have been released a long time ago. It kind of reminds me a little bit about with the Laquan McDonald, the length of time it took to release the tape, the lying in the initial reports by the officers, all these things, that's part of a cover-up. It's really no more complicated than that.
Again, what we see and what they said just don't line up, Chief Craig. And this, again, puts a spotlight on the issue in terms of reporting, among other things. And I think public belief after incidents like this about just taking at face value when police say ... Well, if police say, in the case of Ronald Greene, he just happened to die in the car afterwards, but they don't tell us about everything that happened before that, how can we be just believing blindly what police say?
Well, we certainly don't want to paint an entire profession with a broad brush. If this had happened in Detroit and this was this type of cover-up, that police officer would not be employed, regardless of what happens with any potential criminal charges. And I agree with Chuck. I mean, there are a lot of issues here. And while it was ruled an accidental death, what's mind-boggling for me, this man was dragged. There had to be contusions. He was beaten. He was choked. Did the medical examiner take those issues into account? Or was she just blind to the fact that, this was all as a result of an accident? It's difficult. I mean, the cover-up runs deep. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I mean, you look at that video, the disregard for human life here is just indisputable. Chief Craig, Commissioner Ramsey, thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll warn you now that what I'm about to describe, some of it will be hard to hear. I will also warn you that I'm going to play some tape in a couple of minutes that many people will find hard to watch. I certainly did. But when this story broke today, even though there are stories of this type that seem like they break all the time, this one in particular just seemed to stop the news in its tracks. Certainly for everybody who works on this show, it stopped us all in our tracks. Just kind of, you can't really move on once you've seen something like this. What this is about is something that happened in Louisiana just over 2 years ago. And in West Monroe, Louisiana, there's a hospital there called Glenwood Regional Medical Center. And that night, May 10th in 2019, the emergency room at that hospital received an ambulance. And the ambulance held a 49-year-old man who was handcuffed to a gurney. He was already deceased when the ambulance pulled into Glenwood Regional Medical Center, and they wheeled him into the ER. The ambulance was accompanied by Louisiana State Police. And the police that night told the emergency room doctor who was attending this ambulance that the man who was dead in the ambulance had died on impact when he crashed his car into a tree. That was the explanation for why this man was dead when he arrived at the ER. And the doctor examined the body, examined the man who'd been brought in the ambulance, noted in his doctor's notes that the man was covered in blood and covered in bruises. But he also noted that the man had 2 taser prongs hanging out of his back. Wait a minute. This is supposedly a car crash casualty. What? They're saying he crashed into a tree, died on impact. What, did the tree tase him after he hit it? The ER doctor noted all this in his notes and actually wrote in his notes that night, he wrote, quote, "does not add up." Because, right, it did not add up. And yet that really was the official explanation that Louisiana State Police tried to go with for how a 49-year-old barber in West Monroe, Louisiana, a man named Ronald Greene, that's the story they tried to tell about how he died that night. Louisiana State Police told Mr. Greene's family that he died when he crashed his car during a chase. Troopers said they tried to pull him over for some sort of unspecified traffic violation shortly after midnight, about 30 miles south of the Arkansas state line outside Monroe. They said he died on impact when he crashed into a tree. It took the ER doctor pointing out the freaking taser prongs still hanging out of his back. It took Mr. Greene's family filing a wrongful death suit for police to admit that, yes, okay, something else might have happened. No, they can't come up with an explanation for how the tree fired those taser prongs into him. Police released a one-page new report with a new explanation that said, quote, Greene was taken into custody after resisting arrest and a struggle with troopers. And then inexplicably, he became, quote, unresponsive. He became unresponsive and died on his way to the hospital. The report did not describe any use of force by the troopers in this instance. And that was literally all the Louisiana State Police said about the death of Ronald Greene. That's all they have ever said. To this day, more than 2 years later, the Louisiana State Police have still given no further explanation of Ronald Greene's death in their custody. And crucially, for all of this time, they have refused to release the troopers' body camera footage from that night. It took 474 days after Mr. Greene died for the state police to even open an internal investigation into what happened. And that was only when their hand was forced. Summer of protests over the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis had put the spotlight back on cases like Mr. Greene's. Perhaps more presciently, in terms of seeing what impact it might have, Mr. Greene's family also took the radical step of releasing graphic photos to the public in an effort to demonstrate to the public that the police explanation of what killed Ronald Greene was a ridiculous explanation. They released photos of the condition of the body when they received it. They showed deep bruises, deep cuts to Ronald Greene's face and scalp. They also showed his vehicle. They released a photo of his vehicle. It's the car he'd been driving the night that he died, showed that the car was only mildly damaged. The airbags hadn't deployed. This was not a car that had been involved in a major crash that had mortally wounded its driver. In the midst of all of this, the Justice Department announced that it had opened a civil rights investigation into Ronald Greene's death. Can you imagine how bad a case has to look for the Trump Justice Department to open a civil rights investigation? Really? Did they even do that? And still, the Louisiana State Police would not say anything else about Ronald Greene's death. Wouldn't release the body cam footage, wouldn't afford any further explanation of what happened. Last September, they finally decided to fire one of the officers that was involved in Mr. Greene's death, although they would not say why they were firing him. Tragically, that officer died in a single vehicle car crash just hours after he was told that he was fired. Days later, the Associated Press obtained audio of that same officer describing how he beat and choked Ronald Greene the night of his death. On a recording from his body cam microphone, that officer who was in the one car crash, was heard telling somebody very matter-of-factly that he, quote, beat the ever-living F out of Ronald Greene. He said, quote, choked him and everything else. He was spitting blood everywhere, and all of a sudden he just went limp. After that horrifying reporting, Ronald Greene's family was finally, after a year and a half, allowed to see the body cam footage from the night that he died. The family's attorney said that Mr. Greene's mother and sister wailed like they were at a funeral when they finally saw the footage. He said it was damning footage that showed the troopers choking and beating Ronald Greene, repeatedly jolting him with tasers, dragging him face down across the pavement. That attorney, Lee Merritt, who also watched the footage, told the Associated Press, quote, this family has been lied to the entire time about what happened. The video was very difficult to watch. It's one of those videos like George Floyd and even Ahmaud Arbery, where it is just so graphic. Well, today what happened is that today we learned to our collective horror that the attorney for the Greene family was right when he described it that way. Because today the Associated Press obtained and published edited excerpts from the Louisiana State Troopers body cam footage from the night that Ronald Greene died. And I will tell you that this stopped the news today for a reason. I'm going to show you some of what the AP published today. As I said, it is not a pleasure to watch. That is a grave understatement. It is disturbing to watch. And the nightmarish nature of the video of this incident is compounded by how long all of this was kept secret, how blatantly state troopers lied about what really happened. There is something even worse about the fact that we are only seeing this footage now more than 2 years after the fact. And not because the police finally decided to release it, but because a dogged reporter from the Associated Press was finally able to get it. And that's the only reason it has come out. Again, it is more than 2 years after this happened, and they have had this all the time. So here's the first bit of video we're going to play tonight. This is when police approach Ronald Greene's car. They have been chasing him. This is the chase has come to an end. I'll tell you again, this footage is excerpted and edited by the Associated Press. We don't have the raw tape. The full footage they obtained is 46 minutes long. They say there's long stretches where Mr. Greene is not on camera. The trooper whose body camera footage it is appears to cut the microphone off about halfway through. That makes it hard to discern what's going on in some moments. We don't have footage from other troopers at the scene. The AP itself is cautioning that it can be difficult to piece together what's happening at all times. But in some of it, it's clear. Like in this clip where police first approach Ronald Greene's car, it certainly appears that he is not resisting and, in fact, is pleading with the troopers.
Let me see your hands. Let me see your hands, mother. Come here, mother. I got you. Okay. Come here, mother. Oh, Lord Jesus. Oh, get it. Let me see your hands. Let me see your hands. Okay. I'm scared. I'm your brother. I'm scared.
It says at the end there, officer, I'm scared. I'm your brother. I'm scared. We also have another portion of the body cam video after the troopers get Mr. Greene out of the car. And you'll see Mr. Greene on the ground here, appearing pretty motionless, while an officer tases him again. The officer then handcuffs him. Mr. Greene is clearly bloodied at this point. The officers, part of the reason we can confirm that is that the officers are commenting about the amount of his blood that they've got on them and the fact that they are wiping it off themselves.
Officer, get on the ground! Get on the ground! Taser.
Make sure Union rolling.
Oh! Get up here! Get that door! Oh, you all right? Blood all over. Oh, this guy ain't got AIDS. Oh.
The AP tonight has posted one other portion of the video. This portion doesn't have sound. We believe what happened here is the trooper turned off the microphone on his body cam, but you can see here Ronald Greene handcuffed on the ground. The AP reports that later, after a several-minute stretch in which Ronald Greene is not seen on camera, he appears again limp, unresponsive, bleeding from his head, bleeding from his face. He's then loaded onto an ambulance gurney. His arm is cuffed to the bed rail. But here what you will see is an officer putting leg shackles on him. And then I'm not going to show you this part, but what you can see in part of this video is the officer dragging Mr. Greene by those leg shackles across the ground face down. Again, his handcuffs are on him behind his back. His legs are shackled. He is face down and limp, and they are dragging him by the leg shackles face down across the ground. Now, the Louisiana State Police tonight would not comment on the content of these videos, except to say that the release of the video was not authorized. Yeah, tell us about it. They said the release of these videos, quote, undermines the investigative process. Yes, how is that investigative process going? Well, the officer who dragged Ronald Greene on his face by his leg shackles, he was suspended from duty for 50 hours for that offense. 50 hours. Another of the troopers is now on unpaid leave, but not for Ronald Greene's death. He and several other troopers from the same unit were arrested a few months ago for beating up other black men in their custody. They were also discovered to be bragging to each other over text messages about the violence they have inflicted on black men they have arrested. But there's also the federal investigation into Ronald Greene's death. There's also his family's